Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Well, that is right, my friends. It is a pleasure to be here with you. I apologize for being out yesterday. I shared with you late last week that I was taking our youngest daughter to an AAU basketball tournament in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Got a few stories about that that I like to get to, time permitting here. But our travels prevented me from being able to be behind this microphone yesterday. So we're back at it today. They finished third, so they won. Well, they had a forfeit. And then they won 2 of their 3 games. She actually, if I can just brag for a moment, not really, just she played well in one game in particular, I think, and hit the game winner with 5 seconds to go, which is exciting to do. But, as a parent, and this goes probably for many of you listening to me, I'm more proud of her when she does the little things right. And it was funny because even after hitting that shot, she didn't even really say anything about it to me. Now, there was a shot she hit at the buzzer to send it to overtime a couple weeks ago, a 3-pointer that she was very excited about. But you could tell she was glad that they won, but I don't know. It's just funny. Kids are. I don't think she thought too much about it, but I had a great time. With my daughter. So that's where we were, and we'll be back at it here today, my friends. And I want to talk about Iran today. I'm going to do my best to go through everything that's going on out there, including things like, the media now stumbled into the truth. Again, Rush used to call these random acts of journalism. 60 Minutes over the weekend did a story on Iran's highly enriched uranium, HEUs, as they said there on the program, and actually admitted, and I'll play that soundbite for you here quickly, relatively soon here in the first segment, but admitting that they have they believe that Iran has enough highly enriched uranium for 10 nuclear weapons, which is ironic because if you listen to the Democrat Party, at least a big chunk of them, they say Iran posed no threat. Fetterman's out there attacking it. There's others now that are saying things, which again, we'll get to the political ramifications of this and how it's being used the messaging is being manipulated and used to win elections and to change the messaging, change the story in the elections so as to favor Democrats' absurd positions on these things. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Again, it's my pleasure, my friends, to be here. One of the biggest challenges that we have as conservatives is finding ways to ensure that our values align with the things that we do, and that includes how we invest our money. 4-8 Financial specializes in what they call biblically responsible investing. That means they screen out companies that do not align with your faith, your values, so that you're not funding things that go completely against what you believe in. They do all the heavy lifting. All you have to do is complete a quick and easy assessment. It is quick and it is easy because I've done it. So to do that assessment and to find out to what degree your investments align with your values, All you have to do is head to 48financial.com/Todd. Again, 48financial.com/Todd, and take that assessment, because your money, my friends, should work for your values, but at least we should agree they shouldn't be working against them, my friends. So 48financial.com/Todd. All right, so let's get started here. Excuse me, let's get started here today. And let's begin by talking about what Tim Walz is out there saying. Tim Walz, of course, the embattled governor of Minnesota, who's now basically been forced to not run again. But this guy, he's dangerous. He's dangerous. In fact, I've referred to him as the most dangerous governor in the United States, not to be outdone by the nation's most dangerous mayor, Mayor Jacob Frey of Minneapolis. These two together pose a very dangerous 1-2 punch, very dangerous and very negative 1-2 punch for the state of Minnesota, and for freedom-loving Americans around the country, because this is the sort of stuff that's exported. So, Tim Walz is speaking here at the podium, making comments about Donald Trump, making allegations that Trump just, I guess, went into Iran because he's a fascist, and this is now tied to fascism, which is wild to think about. You know, I know Rush Limbaugh used to call the Democrat Party, or certain elements of the Democrat Party, I want to be clear here, but he used to call a group of voters that would vote for these Democrats, these folks that didn't know anything, didn't understand much of anything, bought into the narrative that was proclaimed by the Democrat Party and so forth. He would call these folks low information voters. Low info voters. These are people who just either saw the world through the superficial lens that was presented by the media, by the radical left. These were people who, they may have been educated, but they weren't given or haven't figured out how to get access to actual information here, real information. But fascism is not, it's just the oversimplification of what these ideas are. If a president leads us into war, it does not mean he's a fascist. Could mean, just forget about names and who's in office now and all that stuff, the emotions. It certainly could mean that, but that's the idea that the only people who start, and I say start, or he says start a war, the people who are actually starting the war, or are the Islamo-fascists, the people running the Islamic Republic, of Iran. But Trump being a fascist in Tim Walz's mind that's irrelevant as to whether communists start wars. People who love freedom start wars. If freedom, were our founders fascists because they engaged in the Revolutionary War? Was Abraham Lincoln a fascist because of the Civil War? This is just preposterous, but I want to play the soundbite, and I also want you to focus specifically on his portion of the statement here where he says that there was no threat present, no threat posed by the Islamic Republic of Iran, and it was unjustifiable. And that, of course, in Tim Walz's mind means that it's fascist, but a lot going on here. But I want you to listen, because we're going to go and we're going to talk about what 60 Minutes has to say about Iran having enough HEU, highly enriched uranium, to produce 10 nuclear weapons. So that being said, here's Tim Walz at the podium saying that there was no reason to go into the Islamic Republic of Iran with missiles and aircraft to do these targeted strikes.
We've got a feeble-minded, trigger-happy president who plunged us into a war where no threat was present, with no clear objectives and no exit plan. We need to call that what it is. That's fascism.
Okay. So again, if you couldn't really hear that, the mic is, I got that as high as I really can on the soundboard here. But he said this: we've got a feeble-minded, trigger-happy president who plunged us into a war where no threat was present, with no clear objectives. That's fascism. First of all, how is that fascism? Number one. How is this fascism? This, by the way, is at the Global Progressive Mobilization Conference, I guess. Forward Together Now. I mean, he's speaking to a bunch of, communists here. But that is not what the definition of fascism is. I would venture a guess to say that 1 out of 100 of these people in the audience could define fascism. But nonetheless, Tim Walz was up here saying that this is fascism because Trump is feeble-minded and trigger-happy, and he started a war where there was no threat present and there's no objectives. Well, let's break this down. Feeble-minded, trigger-happy president. Trump has done a lot to prevent wars. Now, I will openly admit that this second term in office, he has engaged in operations, dare I say, limited. I mean, we haven't sent massive amounts of ground troops in. I have to tell you that this is a possibility. I hope that it's not a reality, but it certainly is a possibility as we walk this road with the lunatics running Iran right now. But that's not what we've done. We had an operation in Venezuela to capture Maduro. We've got this situation in Iran. But the question isn't whether or not we used military force to hit objectives, to carry out necessary actions to prevent things from happening. The question is, why did we do it? And as I've said on this program before, and I'll say it again, I'll say it a little bit louder for those in the back who aren't paying attention, the low information voter. If you've tuned in here, you're welcome to this program. I'm glad that you're here. I hope that you take a moment to think for yourself and understand what we're truly up against here, instead of just buying the narrative that's pushed down the throats of the American people. But if a group of people decide that there's going to be violence, I mean, just think about this logically. If someone decides, let's just say, if someone decides in the high school classroom that there's going to be a fight, what can be done to prevent it? You see, at some point, the only way to stop people who want to use force aggressively, offensively, to force their will, to take away the rights and, the rights of other people, to harm them, to pose a threat to them, the only way to stop that is to match it with a little bit more force so that you actually come out the winner. That's the only way. I'm amazed. I had a professor in college. I won't say her. Actually, I don't know if I remember her name. It was a female. She taught a Bible course. I find myself wondering if I was responsible for her not coming back to teach the Bible course, because at the end of the semester, they would give us recommendation sheets to fill out. And we had to grade the professor, basically. And I laid into this lady because here we have a Bible course, and it was wild to me that we had a professor teaching the Bible who seemed to want to do everything besides share the message of what's in the Bible. As I've shared with you, I've been going through this Bible study, called the Bible Recap, and I recommended it to you. To those of you who want to understand the Bible, especially the full story of the Bible, it's a free study. I use it on the Bible app. It's called it's called the Bible Recap, and her name, the one who leads it, her name is Tara Lee Cobble. She does an absolutely fantastic job, and so it's a through the Bible plan that takes a year, and I usually get off course a little bit here and there, but it takes a year if you do it every day and don't have any, hiccups or whatever. And you can listen to it, which is what I typically do. And then there's a, 6, 7, 8 minute video afterwards, where she explains, she goes into some things and gives some context and all of that. And it's very, very helpful to listen to the story of the Bible. The full picture, right? And it's read chronologically, at least the best that we can do that, at least the best that people can piece that together. And so you might jump around to different Psalms, for example, when you're in certain chapters of the Old Testament, and then you'll finish up Psalms later because one Psalm might have been written during the, one part of the Bible that happened later down the road, and another might have been written by Moses, for example. And so you go through this and you realize, which again, I know as those of you who are followers of Christ, you know this, the entire story is a love story of God trying, well, I don't say tried, God doesn't try, God does, but God restoring us. We sinned and broke that relationship with him. We caused all this stuff. All the stuff that's happening today is the result of our rebellion against God. We sinned and the world began to unravel, and now we have, nuclear threats from these lunatics over here in the Islamic Republic of Iran. And so we've got this story that is a wonderful story that needs to be told. But this professor, she made it about everything but the story. I don't remember any part of that being discussed. And I remember a classmate who was, I don't know if he was an exchange student or if he had recently moved to the United States or what, but I do know he was from Japan. And he made the comment one day in class, which I found utterly fascinating and insightful, because again, he was from a part of the world that didn't have proportionally a lot of people reading the scriptures. He had another religious background. He said, I expected this Bible to be a bunch of rules. Don't do this, don't do that. He said, but it's stories. And that's there certainly are rules given in the Bible, I want to be clear, but that's not the vast majority of this. The vast majority is the narrative, is the story of how God worked through people to accomplish his plan, to move things forward to the point where his son Jesus came to this earth. And our professor didn't do any of that. She didn't explain any of that. In fact, I remember one of my classmates instead doing a story, or I guess a report, on the possibility of Jesus being a woman in our class. And these were the sorts of nonsensical things that we did. And I remember laying into this lady, laying into her, and saying that, she didn't teach the Bible. That was a sham to me that she was there. I learned nothing about the Bible from her. The things that I did learn from her, I would say, I learned that they weren't true or an accurate depiction of what was going on there. But she's the person, and this is the point I want to get to. She's the person who told us. She told us that she had dogs, and she could reason with her dogs. She said, she didn't understand people who smacked their dog's nose and told them no or whatever, tried to discipline them. No. She just said, she just explained things. You don't get on the couch, Fluffy, Fido, you don't jump up on the couch because that's where humans sit. You can stay over here on your bed or your area, but you can't sit on the couch. And the dog, I was supposed to believe, was just nodding in agreement there. It's absolutely preposterous nonsense and total drivel. But these are the sorts of things that she said. And it reminds me, that level of understanding, or I should say misunderstanding, leads me to think that's how a lot of people view the Islamic Republic of Iran. If you just say things nicely, please don't have nuclear weapons, they'll say, okay, we won't. And then we're supposed to just take them at their word for that. We're just supposed to accept that as being the reality and all these sorts of things. But this is what the left is out there saying. Tim Walz says that there was no threat present in the Islamic Republic of Iran. The problem is that 60 Minutes, who of course is part of the media, which is the Democrat Party's PR machine, they actually said quite a different thing. This is a 30-second promotion for 60 Minutes that was out on X. I think it might have been the trailer that would have played on CBS, or maybe during a commercial, or at the beginning of the actual program. And I'm going to play this really quickly to see what they say.
The war with Iran hinges on 3 letters, HEU, and it's believed Iran has enough of it underground to eventually make 10 nuclear bombs. What would it take for the U.S. to secure that highly enriched uranium? You'll hear about a covert mission that took place 32 years ago, and why a similar operation in Iran would be so difficult.
Would an operation like this be worth risking American lives?
In my opinion, yes.
Okay, so that's the trailer. That's what played. And lo and behold, they've done some actual reporting here, because this is true. We believe this is a risk, a threat that Iran posed. And apparently, Tim Walz doesn't see any threat from Iran having, I guess, 10 nuclear weapons. Wild, wild stuff, my friends. Got to take a quick time out, but let's face it, when living with discomfort can be very difficult. Prescription medications, those can help, but those often come with a long list of side effects, not to mention the risk of dependency. More people are exploring natural options like Kratom from Christopher's Organic Botanicals. This is a family-run company. They do things the right way. They work directly with Indonesian farmers, lab test every batch to make sure it is clean. There's no synthetics, no chemicals, no surprises, just an honest, natural kratom that's been used for generations. Real kratom is properly handled. It's pure. It is not synthetic. In fact, if you've heard the horror stories about kratom, that comes from the synthetic blends that people are making. It's junk. Christopher's doesn't do that. You can start with their Kratom Starter Pack. Code ToddHuff saves you 10%. Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. That's Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Quick time out for me. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Again, the media, who very rarely gets it even remotely close to right, is out there saying, 60 Minutes, is that Iran has enough HEU, which is highly enriched uranium. At least it's believed that they have enough of it to make at least 10 nuclear bombs. In fact, 60 Minutes is asking, what would it take for us to secure it? They have a guest on the show that they ask, is it worth risking American lives to secure this this highly enriched uranium? He says he believes that it is. And as we move down this road with Iran, and we look at all the things that are happening regarding the Strait of Hormuz, regarding the U.S. Navy disabling the engine of a ship that had an Iranian flag on it, taking control of that ship, as we look at the negotiations and talks of ceasefires and all the things happening out there. We have to be mindful that inside these meeting rooms, behind closed doors, when Trump and his administration are considering their options, they're talking about this very thing. They're talking about this because if Iran has enough highly enriched uranium to make 10 nuclear bombs, and if we've decided, and by the way, we have, at least Trump has decided that it is absolutely inexcusable and just something that cannot be allowed to happen is that Iran has nuclear weapons, then you can see clearly that we're on a collision course here. And the question is, this highly enriched uranium, this is needle in a haystack sort of stuff, right? They've got a huge country. It's a mountainous terrain. They've got things that are underground. They are experts at playing a cat and mouse game, a hide and seek game. They are experts at buying time. And that's what's happening here now, as I've talked about before. They're trying to buy time because they want to be able to have a nuclear weapon for lots of reasons, one of which they've got an offensive weapon that can wipe their enemies, which include the nation of Israel and the United States of America. They would love nothing more than to wipe these folks off the face of the planet. They've made it clear. They've made it abundantly clear. They chant death to Israel, death to death to America, death to the United States. They call us the great Satan. They call Israel the little Satan. They have dreams of establishing, a regional, they might not use this word caliphate, but it's essentially the same thing. They want to have a world where we are governed, and hear me say where you are governed by Islamic law, whether you are Islamic or not. In fact, they say you're going to be Islamic. They think that they've got that mandate from Allah to force you to become Muslim, and if you do not submit, they will use whatever force necessary to take care of you. They believe they're justified in this. These are maniacal madmen. I cannot emphasize this enough. Tim Walz used the term fascist to talk about Trump. He, as usual, is 180 degrees wrong because the real fascists in this scenario are the Islamo-fascists. They are the ones who are using some incredibly aggressive and forceful actions, taking away the rights, the God-given rights of their people, hoping to take away the God-given rights of people in a larger area in that part of the world or beyond. Worldwide would be something they would love to do as well. They want to have an Islamic government. They want the world to be a theocracy. They want the world to be, to be run by Sharia law, to be run by Islamic law. And that there would be no, again, I don't like the term separation of church and state, but there would be no separation between the religious components of life and the political components of life under their regime. That is what a theocracy is, and they are deadly serious about this. They believe that they've been called by Allah to force these things upon people, to engage in a jihad, in a holy war. This is no joke. Again, you would think that a nation who had to deal with this stuff, and I know, listen, there's Shia and there are Sunni Muslims. Iran is Shia. Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, those are Sunni. So they're not allies in that sense. But it's ironic, they want to do the same thing. They both want to establish, whether they call it, both of them call it the caliphate or not, they want to establish a worldwide or at least a regional theocracy where the people are governed by Islamic law. This is what they want. And they believe they are called by Allah to do this. And they believe that they are justified to do basically anything to fight the biggest enemies of that, which include people in the West, people who believe in individual liberty. They believe enemies of establishing a caliphate or something like that would be Jewish people, would be Christians, would be people who have strong convictions of another religion. That's not acceptable because you've got to submit to Islam according to the lunatics running the Islamic Republic of Iran. And so now you let these folks have a nuclear weapon who they've already threatened to wipe Israel. They told us if they had a nuclear weapon, they're going to wipe Israel off the face of the planet. This is what we're up against. And there are some knuckleheads who refuse to believe this. You would think that a generation after, one single generation after 9/11, you would think that we would still remember. In fact, I remember the slogans. I remember the stickers, whatever, the words on the television screen after 9/11 and the years to follow. Never forget. Never forget. But see, we have forgotten. And again, I understand that the people who attacked us on 9/11 were Sunni Muslim, and that the people that we're fighting today or who are causing a problem in Iran today are Shia. And I understand that they have they can't coexist in their minds. But the tactics and the means by which they want to spread their religion and I'm talking about ISIS, and I'm talking about the Sunnis in ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and the Shia running the Islamic Republic of Iran. They believe in the same general types of tactics. They believe they're justified in killing people. And we have forgotten, my friends. We've forgotten what we're up against. In fact, some people never even wanted to admit that we have been in a religious war. We have been. The war on terrorism against Islamic terrorism was 100% a religious war. Now, you might say, well, that's not how we saw it. It's absolutely how they saw it. I mean, when they crashed those planes into the trade towers or whatever, when they nosedived Flight 93 into the ground in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, what were they yelling? They were yelling Allahu Akbar, right? That's not just a random saying. They were praising the God of Islam as they did those acts. They were doing those things. Now, you could argue, people can argue whether that sort of behavior is ordered and condoned by the Quran. You have people who say that that's unacceptable. You have people who say that that's exactly the sort of thing that they should be doing. And people can argue about that, but to say that they are not, this is not a religious war, and that we haven't found ourselves with Iran in another one is naive, because that's exactly what we're up against. We have forgotten. Some people never learned. Some people never wanted to accept it in the first place. And listen, just like if you go into a Christian church, I remember Billy Graham saying, I have to take a break here, but I remember Billy Graham saying, the great evangelist, that not everybody who sits in the church pews knows Jesus. In fact, he gave a very sobering statistic saying the percentage of people who may actually have a relationship with Jesus sitting in those pews. Likewise, there are Muslims that don't agree or believe in these things. They wouldn't do these things. There's some that would if given the opportunity. There's just a wide swath of people. They're individuals. But some people never wanted to admit or accept that. But I've got to take a break, my friends. Sit tight. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Third and final segment. Let's be honest, when your financial world starts getting a little bit more complicated, you need more than one-size-fits-all advice. That's where Full Suite Wealth shines the brightest. Their team specializes in working with families and individuals at your level, offering personalized guidance that goes far beyond the basics, from private equity and private credit to options, strategies, and coordinated legal planning. Full Suite Wealth helps you see the big picture and make confident decisions about your legacy. It's all about having a dedicated team to guide you each and every step of the way so you can focus on what matters most, your family, your goals, your future. If you want real confidence in your financial life, check out fullsuitewealth.com. Fullsuitewealth.com. Build your legacy, secure your future. It's crazy to me how people have forgotten the lessons of 9/11. It's crazy to me as I listen to some of the objections or I read things on social media, how people are just so obtuse or just so incapable of understanding that all nations are not the same. I see people saying, well, are we going to go to war with other nations because they have nuclear weapons like France and Israel and Pakistan? Thank you, Obama, for teaching me how to say that correctly. Are we going to go to war with these people because they have a nuclear bomb? Well, no, knuckleheads. No, we're not going to do that. I mean, look at what happens. You know, you mentioned those countries, the countries who have nuclear weapons, and most of these people, most of these nations are not using those actively to go around and aggressively threaten their neighbors, right? I mean, that's just not the case. There is an example of one country who does this, and that is North Korea, which, again, we were told by a president back in the 90s, named Bill Clinton, that he got a pinky promise and a signed sheet of paper, and we celebrated that North Korea would never have a nuclear weapon because they promised us they wouldn't. And lo and behold, they do today. They have that. It's believed, I say believed because who really knows if Iran has, where exactly Iran falls on the table here as far as whether or not they have a weapon or not. We don't think that they do, but we believe that they are very, very close to that. We believe that 9 countries around the world actually have nuclear weapons, of course, including the United States, Russia, China, then places like France, the United Kingdom, Israel, Pakistan, India, and then the crazy guy in North Korea. And we can see, you list those names of nations out, and you think, listen, we know that when we're dealing with China or Russia on the world stage, and I lived through the 80s, I remember those days. I remember those days of the Cold War. I remember the videos showing students if there was a nuclear strike, they were supposed to get under their desks and all this silly sort of stuff. I remember that. I grew up with that. A lot of the movies I watched as a kid had that as the storyline, right? I mean, but these folks are not going around just threatening to nuke people. The one example would be North Korea, or the one exception I should say. The one exception is North Korea. And there's about to be another exception if they are allowed to have it, and I hope they're not. Trump is committed to them not having a nuclear weapon. But if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, it changes the game. We would be going through these same types of negotiations, except the stakes would be higher, and there would be a real possibility at any moment they could use that nuclear weapon or threaten to use that nuclear weapon against the nation of Israel. And we can't allow that to happen. Obviously, Israel can't allow that to happen. So this is a real precarious situation. This is not the same thing for the obtuse out there. It is not the same thing for France and the UK to have nuclear weapons as it is for the Islamic Republic of Iran. I can't believe in a world that's just about 25 years past 9/11, I have to explain what these extreme Islamo-fascists would do. Listen, I know bin Laden was Sunni and the Iranians are Shia, but if Osama bin Laden had highly enriched uranium, do you think he would have used it? I mean, this is what we're dealing with. These are the same sorts of people. Again, Shia, not Sunni, but commitment to forcing their beliefs on others and taking away things like religious liberty. They are committed to this 100%. And it's wild to me that this has all happened in the shadow of 9/11, in the shadow of the days where we said we will never forget. We have forgotten. Some people never knew. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I alluded to one last segment. Some people never wanted to admit that we were at war with Islamo-fascists, that they declared this to be a religious war. Some people never wanted to accept that. And as a result, here we find ourselves yet again facing, again, different sect of Islamo-fascists, but certainly the people who are content on using the same tactics to achieve their ends, which they want to have world domination. Folks, I gotta go. Out of time here. Have a great day. SDG.